Hello, everybody. A warm welcome to all of you, and in particular our new panelists, Lebo Lion, Lebo Kang Kunene, Sylvester Chake, who were gracious enough to join us at such short notice after our previous faux pas. For those of you who don't know, we were called out, and rightly so, on the lack of diversity in our previously proposed panel for the launch of this social media landscape report. Yeah, we sometimes don't see the wood for the trees, and we're indeed humbled, but also greatly blessed to receive guidance to build a better South Africa for all. Change is always hard, and we need to do better and work harder to make changes we really want to see. So guys, absolutely thank you very much. Today is the launch of the 2020 Media Landscape Report. Ornica and Worldwide Works have been doing this research since 2012. And this report has actually evolved over the years. What we hope to do is to leave you with some insights, but also either debunk or give you some social media myths. As I said, Ornica and Worldwide Works did this report and obtained the data ourselves, utilizing our own scrapers. But because of the Cambridge Analytica issues, these APIs are closed, and they're getting more and more difficult to really utilize going forward. So we also want to thank some of our partners who came to the party to give us some of that information that we couldn't before. TGI, Psychographica, they all provided data that we couldn't get. And again, these high walls and control data, these platforms have built around it. Hence the theme for this year's Social Media Landscape Report, which is social media myths, high walls, and control data. So the report is broken down into 6 sections. The first section is the survey, and the survey we've sent out questionnaires to digital and social media departments of brands and digital agencies who answered a wide range of questions, and mostly about how they see this, how they see the social media landscape going forward. Then section 2 is about Instagram. I'm not going to build on that. LinkedIn, Twitter. And Twitter mostly is about entertainment, news, politics, and brand engagements. And I'm going to break the first myth now, is that we all think that Twitter is where most negative sentiments actually are. But really, guys, 61% of the sentiments on Twitter is positive. So one myth debunked right early. TikTok, mostly used entertainment. Arthur, I know, loves TikTok. He'll talk a little bit more about it. And our new section is from Psychographica. This is the most technical part of the report, but it's hugely interesting because of its approach to understanding of the personality traits of brands. And it's fascinating how schizophrenic brands can actually be between the platforms, but even within platforms itself. So it's really great for us at Ornica, especially because we measure these brands and provide insights and evaluate those messages. So it's kind of cool to give that insight back to brands. I'm going to be facilitating this, guys. So I know it's just an hour, so I'm going to be quite strict on everybody's time here. But let me introduce you to the panel. Number one, we've got Arthur Goldstuck, who's MD of Worldwide Works. We all know Arthur. One of the things that Arthur does really, really, really well is bring these complex issues down to very simple things for most people to kind of understand. So welcome, Arthur. Lebo Lion, founder of People. And guys, you've got to listen to her podcasts. Lessons with Lion on SoundCloud, on Apple as well. And she's a social media strategist. But log on to her podcast and listen to some of the stuff that she's done. It's really amazing. Lebogang Kunene, marketing manager of but also was at Air Dynamo, who was representatives at some point for Twitter. So he really has a great understanding of Twitter. And finally, Sylvester Chake, chief architect of DNA Brand Architects. And he's written a book called Stand Against Bland. And this book provides some really cool nuggets to young people starting their career in branding. But not only that, how to do things differently. And this is one of the cool things that he brought to this party is how do we do this differently. So without further ado, Arthur, can you please just go into your social media numbers, your trends, the rise of TikTok, and other interesting facts?
Thank you, Oresti. Appreciate the time to speak to everybody. Just for some background, we've been doing this now for a grand total of 9 years. Since 2012, we did our first social media landscape report. And it's been a fascinating journey. It's also often delivered amazing surprises. And we're going to go into those surprises now. And hopefully bust some myths as well. So the subtitle of this year's social media landscape report, as Oresti has mentioned, is on social media myths, high walls and controlled data. So we'll be talking through some of the myths with the panel shortly, as well as how some of those high walls are being scaled. But just before we go into the numbers, just to mention some of the organizations that have collaborated in producing this report with Ornico and Worldwide Works. We've also worked closely with Brandwatch, Global Web Index, Ask Africa, and TGI. And some of the data has come from those partners. We're starting with the social corporation. In other words, how organizations are using social. We surveyed more than 100 of South Africa's biggest brands to come up with numbers. So this is the first set of small surprises, nothing major here, but we didn't expect LinkedIn to be competing with Twitter of major investment for brands. If we looked at last year's numbers, Twitter was at 73%, LinkedIn was 73%, Twitter at 87%. Twitter has fallen back, LinkedIn has risen. So LinkedIn is drawing level with Twitter as a preferred platform for companies to be active on. And then YouTube quite far back, dropping dramatically from 67% last year to 50% this year. Big surprise. But when you ask companies what platforms they'll embrace next, this was where the biggest shifts came. For the first time in quite a few years, we've seen a new brand emerge, and that's TikTok. So 31%, almost a third of brands have suddenly woken up to TikTok, and they said they'll be investing in TikTok in the coming 12 months. Bearing in mind, the survey was conducted a few months ago, so we're really talking about 2020. WhatsApp also emerging as a major area for engagement because of the business channels that WhatsApp now makes possible and the broadcast functionality. Corporate blogs are going to be relatively big, and then YouTube getting a bit of a boost there. In fact, stronger growth from YouTube than from Instagram. But that's also partly because YouTube was way behind Instagram. Then we asked companies which platforms are spending most of their budget on. And this puts the previous slide in context, because when you simply look at the numbers, it's possible that you'll get 100% on every platform. But when you look at budget, that's where the rubber really hits the road. And Facebook is attracting most of the action. Very similar to last year's numbers, 61% last year, 59% this year. The big shift has been LinkedIn going from 11 to more than 15%, Instagram dropping slightly, and then Twitter dropping also proportionately quite a lot, 8% to 5%. But you can see LinkedIn again taking budget away from the others. What's really interesting about this, from my perspective, having looked at the underlying dynamics over the years, is that Facebook is popular not because it's necessarily the most effective, but it's the one that the people allocating the budget and using the budget are most familiar with. And we find that across most social media channels. And that's one of the reasons why TikTok has not featured in the past year, because the people actually running social media campaigns and budgets were clueless about TikTok. So if they didn't know it, but most importantly, if they didn't use it, they weren't going to invest in it. So it's use by the social media practitioners that dictates budget going into social media platforms. And then a key question, has social media brought brand returns? and only 3% said no. In other words, there's still a very strong positive sentiment towards social media. 66% said yes, they did get brand returns, but a worrying 31%, almost a third, were not sure about it. And when you're not sure, you're not going to take too many chances, and that tends to hold budget back. Then we looked at streaming, which was an interesting one because it's a relatively new area for most brands. In fact, this is the first time we ever streamed the social media landscape report. So in a way, it's new for us as well. But only 28% said they would increase spend in social media live streaming. Our suspicion is that coming out of the pandemic and out of the COVID-19 crisis, that number is going to go up significantly. But look at this, when we ask them which platforms they are going to use, half of them don't know. But of those that do, 43% are going to stream on Facebook, 29% on Instagram, YouTube only 12%, Twitter 15%. So Facebook, again, is the preferred platform for streaming as well, even though it may not be the best platform for streaming. But Instagram, IGTV, and similar tools is going to be quite significant in the coming years. And then the question of influencers is always a great one. 29% of brands are using paid social media influencers. But 58%, in other words, double the proportion of those that are paying influencers, know who the most influential people in their social media communities are. So even the brands who know who's the most influential, half of them are not going to pay money for that influence. And then my personal favorite question, because I'm always looking at what comes next in terms of technology, have you allocated budget towards new technology for marketing? And this for social media marketing, of course. 35%, more than a third, said yes. So the question then becomes, where are they going? What's the next big thing? And the next big thing is artificial intelligence combined with chatbots. So chatbots use a form of artificial intelligence. They use machine learning if they properly set up. But we also know from other research we've conducted that most chatbots are badly set up and they're actually enormously frustrating. So it's a relief to see people will be investing in their chatbots. And we hope they're investing in improving the chatbot rather than just throwing more money at more chatbots. And then cloud applications are going to be big as well. And then you'll see just below that machine learning quite strong, comes up quite strongly. Machine learning and artificial intelligence go together and they feed into the chatbot environment. So it's quite a strong integration of technologies that starts becoming visible there. Virtual reality and augmented reality, very sexy technology, but still very limited in its rollout. And the main reason for that is because most brands still don't know how to use it effectively. From there, we move on to the social consumer. And this is stats from a wide range of sources. We do what they call triangulation, which means looking at different sources of data and comparing and correlating the data and coming up with the best estimates, because we don't get the exact numbers from the social media platforms. So starting with Instagram, we find that in South Africa, celebrities absolutely dominate Instagram. Look at the top 6 Instagram personalities in South Africa. Only one of them is a sportsman, and we'll come back to why he is so prominent. Look at that, 9.7 million followers. And then Boiti is next with 3.6 million, just over a third of what AB has. You could say that she's the most popular celeb in South Africa. Again, I'll explain the context of AB in a moment. And then Minnie Dlamini, very close behind. Bonang, also a shade behind, and Casper, a shade behind Bonang. And then Pearl Tuzi coming up strong. I suspect that with the success of Queen Sona, we're going to see Pearl Tuzi rise fast up those ranks as well. So let's look inside those Instagram numbers. Firstly, the total user base in South Africa, we estimate at 9 million. That's a massive number. It shows a huge growth for Instagram among consumers, even if brands haven't quite woken up to its power yet. Penetration over the last 4 weeks, and that is from TGI data that is collected by Ask Africa. 19% of people aged 15 and over living in cities and larger towns in South Africa are active users. And the past 4 weeks measure, we take as a measure of highly active use. 19%, very strong penetration. It equates to 4.7 million users when you look at the sample frame that is being used by TGI. So of the 9 million users, more than half are highly active users. Very powerful user base. And then this is the secret of AB de Villiers' success. It's primarily because of his success in the Indian Premier League cricket. He is one of the most league, and he has a massive following in India. So when you look at South Africa's most popular Instagram personalities, you could actually take AB out of that picture because he's arguably one of India's most popular Instagram personalities. Then we go to LinkedIn, and I'll first show you the historic numbers. The benefit of having conducted this research since 2012 is that we now have quite a deep base of data and growth numbers, and we're able to then show the long-term trends. So Instagram continues to grow globally. At the end of last year, it reached 610 million, well over half a billion users now, close to 10% growth globally. South Africa, last year, 2019, 7.5 million users, more than 10% growth. So South African growth last year was slightly higher than global growth. In the first few months of this year, it hit 7.7 million users. So again, as the brand action shows, LinkedIn is rising fast in public awareness as well as in brand awareness. This is where you really understand where LinkedIn is growing dramatically. And the line that I want to draw your attention to is 1 to 10 employees. That had the strongest proportional growth, from 220,000 users to 290,000 users, almost a third, well over 30% growth in the past year. And that tells you that entrepreneurs who have started small businesses and startups are taking to LinkedIn in a big way. Then we go to Twitter, and some interesting background stats to show where most of the Twitter action is happening. Johannesburg, not surprisingly, is the big Twitter city. Almost 40% of South African Twitter users are from Johannesburg. This is stats from Brandwatch, incidentally. Pretoria is second at over 16%, and Cape Town just under 16%. Surprising that Pretoria has more users than Cape Town. Durban, fair way behind that, and then comes Port Elizabeth, Bloemfontein, and straight out of Benoni, almost 3%, well, 2.5%. And Polokwane also featuring there. But it's interesting when you look at it by province, how dominant Gauteng is. And it's almost as if economic activity also dictates Twitter activity. But let's look deeper inside Twitter at the numbers. So this is the historic tracking or data that we've been tracking for Twitter since 2012. And you can see that in the last few years, it's slowed down significantly after dramatic growth from 2012 to 2014. And now it seems incremental growth every year. But last year, we saw a bit of a jump again to 9 million users. So proportionately, it was the strongest growth that we had seen since 2015. And that's partly because Twitter has become a major source of information as well as participation in public debate. Penetration is interesting. The South African highly active user base is 19% of that population of people aged 15 and over in cities and towns. And that, as with Instagram, equates to 4.7 million highly active users. So again, just over half the user base is highly active. And what's fascinating this year is that Twitter and Instagram are neck and neck in terms of user numbers as well as highly active numbers. And then this is the one people always want to know. When should I tweet? What time of day should I tweet? And you can see that you should tweet when people get to work. Well, now it's when people get out of bed, I guess, because then they're at work. But anytime from 9 a.m. For the rest of the day until 10 p.m. is peak time. But the true peak is 8 o'clock at night. That's after supper. It'll be interesting to see if a lockdown changes this trend. We don't have the latest numbers coming out of lockdown, but this is the overall trend over the past year or so. And if you want to get most people's attention, you might actually want to go at a time that's not so busy, because 8 and 9 o'clock at night is when everyone is tweeting. So you're going to get drowned out. As much as that sounds counterintuitive, that you should tweet when everyone's tweeting. What you should rather do is tweet when everyone's reading before they start tweeting. So maybe 8 o'clock in the morning. Then we come to TikTok, the new kid in town. As Oresti mentioned earlier, this is one of my favorites because I found it quite early and I was able to see the emerging trends and the emerging personalities quite early. And I've been fortunate enough to meet some of these fascinating personalities, to see what an ordinary person can achieve if they embrace a channel of this kind and suddenly become a big name. This is what told us that TikTok had truly arrived when Cosmo put some of the most popular TikTok personalities on their cover. The irony, the deep, bitter, and sad irony of this image is that the TikTok personalities have outlived Cosmopolitan, which, as most of you will know, is closing down as a result of its publisher closing down. So this almost symbolizes the extent to which the conversation around the issues that Cosmopolitan was covering is going to move very strongly into the social media environment. And these are some of the people who will take that conversation further. That is Shanae, Whitney, and Kelly, three of the most popular TikTok personalities in South Africa. But who are the most popular TikTok personalities in this country? And I've highlighted a few of the giants of TikTok. It might not be exactly correct, but I can tell you that the most popular TikTok personality in South Africa is Wean Magic. And he has 9.2 million followers on TikTok. It's very obvious that he has broken out internationally. He's a magician who does cool tricks on TikTok, some very funny tricks, some that are very carefully set up, and some that are just a magician plying his trade. But Wean already last year was the most popular South African on TikTok, but he had less than 5 million followers. So his growth has been stratospheric, and it's a result of breaking out internationally. The rest are local stars. And you can see how far behind Wean the next one is. This is Shanae Grobler, who has 2.1 million followers. Simply by being nice on TikTok. Who knew that being nice could actually win you such a following? People criticize her for her eyebrows being skewed, which just shows how idiotic people can be. And then Shanae's on-off friendship with King Berto has helped Roberto reach 1.1 million followers. The big mystery on TikTok is whether there is a relationship between the two. And part of the dynamic between them is to keep the users or the followers guessing. And that's also what helps to drive up their viewership of their individual videos as well as their following. Then Troy Shepard's, one of my favorite guys on TikTok, has just cracked the 1 million mark. And he's just funny on TikTok. Some of his videos are, in fact, very serious. He deals extensively with being black in South Africa in an environment where that has been a disadvantage in the past, but he's also showing how to overcome those disadvantages. And then another of my favorites, Whitney 8, who is famous, as she told me, for the walk. You must see Whitney 8's walk. She's closing in on a million followers. Also, one of those people who, by really being a nice person, has attracted a massive following. Then we move on from TikTok to TGI's numbers. This is Target Group Index, which is an annual survey that is conducted by Ask Africa in South Africa. We work with Ask Africa to structure their questions around technology and social media, and that then gives us the right to analyze and use their data. Last year, they conducted around 30,000 interviews representing 24.6 million South Africans. I mentioned the sample frame before. And we look at the past 7-day metric to represent highly active users. It's a powerful measure of impact.
Sorry, Arthur, you can just finish up, if you don't mind. Sorry to push you.
Okay. All of this data will be in our social media landscape report, so I'm going to move to the end. I just wanted to show you Tinder coming up strongly in their numbers. These are the highly active numbers of Facebook users in South Africa, of social media and instant messaging users in South Africa. And Pinterest and Tinder coming up very strongly. And Snapchat still in there as well amongst the youth. The age of users also dictates what platforms they use most commonly. This graph will also be in the report that will be downloadable. But this is the single most important indicator of whether you're going to use social media actively or not. And that is your level of technology experience. And you can see, especially with LinkedIn and Instagram, how level of technology experience dictates whether you're going to use those platforms actively. So the tech adopter, more than 50% will use Instagram. The laggard, just over 33%, so a third versus half. And then platforms used more than once a day. This is from Global Web Index. WhatsApp absolutely dominates in terms of highly, highly active use. This is the word cloud of SA tweets from Brandwatch. And you can see everyone wants to be followed. Everyone's retweeting, and everyone needs people. And then my absolute favorite piece of data analysis from Brandwatch and Crimson Hexagon is their emoji cloud. This tells us the emotion of South Africans on Twitter. And you can see it's a balance between laughing and crying. But when you look around the laughing and crying, there's more love and laughter than there is hatred and anger. So the dominant emotion on Twitter in South Africa, again by this, is love and laughter. Thank you very much.
Cool, Arthur. Thanks a lot. Jeez, I know there's a lot of information, and it does take a bit of time to kind of go through it. But thanks, sorry to push you there. Guys, let's get on to some of the questions. So I think COVID's happened. A lot of brands are shifting and they're thinking about it. Where do they put their money? So how should brands rethink their social media marketing strategy and spend in comparison to last year? We'll start with you, Sylvester. You're on mute. Sorry, Sylvester, you're on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Oresti. I have to say that there is on the report, one of the things that really stood out for me was a very strong disproportionate spend allocation in terms of social media across the entire marketing mix for a brand or campaign. While we see it as quite important in driving messaging and engagement for brands, we are seeing that not a lot of brands are putting enough money and spend behind those campaigns. And I have to say that where brands are going to be going, and I can see this clearly, is that the increase on social is going to be magnified. I think particularly now, if you look at what's happened in the last 2 weeks, for example, around the world, where social media has literally brought the world to a standstill with movements like Black Lives Matter. It's all happening on social media, fighting injustice, fighting crime, crowdsourcing, and all of that. We are seeing that. I think most brands will realize even more the importance of social media across that. And I think we'll see a very strong increase going forward.
This time, Leboline, do you want to add anything to Sylvester's comments?
Just unmute myself. Thank you. I agree with Sylvester's sentiments. It's absolutely correct. I see it that way as well. And I just also like to add, based on the research that's been done, and what I'm seeing is that there's a big knowledge gap, in terms of the people who make decisions and the people who implement social media campaigns. So I think that what brands should be doing looking forward and going forward is really investing in the tools that allow them to understand how to use social media, how to measure social media, and how to make it work for their businesses.
Lebo, you very much into the podcast space, and COVID have shifted a lot of people. So some of the data shows have shifted some of the people off some of the other platforms, or not necessarily shifted them off, but actually increased podcast listening and viewing. What is your view on that?
So the podcast market has been really interesting during COVID and lockdown, because I actually thought that I'd get more listens on my podcast because people are at home. But what happened was people started demanding a video element to my podcast, and it's very interesting to me. So it seems that when people are home, they don't just want to listen to something, they also want to view something. And so the podcasts that do have a video element to them, the podcasts that are on YouTube, got more listens than to have space on SoundCloud, Spotify, and iTunes. I found that very interesting. And in doing that, actually, in creating video elements to my podcast, I saw a rise in all of my social media platforms. So I saw a rise in Twitter followers, I saw a rise in Instagram followers, and I also saw more interest from traditional media platforms, so from your radio and your TV, which shows me that more people actually pay attention when they're watching something than when they're just listening to something. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah, so brands should actually be aware of that kind of shift and transformation.
Yeah.
Lebogang, in terms of, from your perspective, how should brands rethink their social marketing strategy compared to last year? If there's anything else you can add to that.
I think I'll tie back to what Lebo and Sylvester talked about, saying that there'll be a shift to digital. Everyone will be moving to digital. But with this shift to digital, you also need to understand the audience that you have. You can't just have a hit or miss strategy. So I see a lot of consumer intelligence tools. So I think brands need to invest in that, to know who you're talking to, what their interests are, what platforms they're on, and what time they are most active. So I think that will drive like massive ROI for the brands, instead of just doing the same things they were doing on social media.
Cool. Arthur, I've got a question
and
from...
I think that, sorry, if I may, Oresti.
Go for it, Sylvester, yeah. Interject.
I also wanted to say, what I've seen since lockdown is definitely, if we look at all our clients, we've seen a much more increase and focus on digital and social media. And that's already really happened. And I think because of that as well, there's going to be even more of a need for creativity within that space, because we are seeing that most brands are doing a monkey see, monkey do. A brand does something and the other brand does the same thing. And I think on social media, it's not working, as effectively. So the investment in making sure that creativity also leads in how you manage and use the platforms is going to be a lot more amplified. We can't just be on the platform. We have to still be able to creatively activate on the platform in the best possible way. And to Lebohang's point, also making sure that the audience that we're talking to is being engaged in the way that they appreciate on that platform.
Yeah. I think it's also crazy. We saw during that KFC wedding where for KFC it was really great branding, but then you saw all the other brands trying to jump onto this bandwagon, and actually they got no mileage, they got no coverage out of it. So, sometimes brands just jump on it just because they want to jump on it and don't have a particular strategy going forward. So, absolutely. Arthur, the question from the crowd. Do we know when TikTok might be monetized in South Africa, since TikTok is one of your favorite mediums at the moment?
We don't know yet. I asked that question of TikTok, and they said that TikTok offers opportunities for brands to reach creators to develop engaging interactive content together tailored for a new audience. So they're really encouraging brands to utilize it themselves. And I guess they must be still working on the monetization model. I suspect the main priority is working on the evaluation model for an IPO or going separately onto the stock market from their holding company, because there's such tremendous value to be unlocked in terms of the excitement around the brand worldwide, because it's a global phenomenon. And just in terms of the South African numbers, I think that we're reaching a true critical mass that means that brands are going to want to throw money at the channel. To put that in context, someone asked the question if we have stats for TikTok. We tend to work on the basis that the most popular local personality on a platform is unlikely to reach more than a third of the total user base of that platform, just because of different niches. TikTok might be different in that there might be far more of a homogeneous audience. But if you take Shanae, for example, she has 2.1 million followers. If we work on that rule of thumb, that would suggest a user base of around 6 million in South Africa. So that's the figure we're working on roughly at this stage. We're looking for ways to validate that number further or triangulate it further. But if that is correct, and if there are at least 5 million people, which is what we estimated at the end of last year, then it's a very compelling platform for brands to throw money at. And I'll be very surprised if TikTok don't start making monetization available to brands. Well, for users, but to monetize via brands. What we do know, though, is that a lot of the big TikTok personalities are earning a very healthy living from endorsements as a result of their TikTok popularity.
Yeah, and I think South Africa's got, I think one of the great things about TikTok is the creativity that comes behind it. And as South Africans, we're seriously creative. So let's stay on the TikTok space. Sylvester, in terms of brands, so the two big things, the rising star is TikTok. Influencers are huge. Creativity is big in South Africa. How do you see brands mixing creativity, all these influencer and TikTok all together, and like they actually utilize it to build their brands and even maybe globalize their brands?
Yeah, I have to say that that is one of the biggest challenges that we face, I suppose, in terms of social media as a whole, is that initially when it starts, like TikTok, it is really about entertainment, and it's about engagement, and it's about almost building a community. And I think that the best possible way forward for brands would be a strong collaboration with the TikTokers themselves, because the minute that the brands start getting involved, and then you are going to start seeing Yogi Sip trying to showcase themselves on TikTok, and then it takes away the authenticity and almost like that joy that TikTok used to have. And we see that as well on Instagram, where, I mean, of the 9 million users and the 4.7 highly active users, there's a lot of content there that it just seems a little bit too stale, because brands come on board and they almost kill the creativity and the vibe. And I think a strong collaboration of being able to take your brand and align with the TikTokers themselves to activate it in such a way that it feels really organic and it feels pretty much connected to the TikToker itself. I think the idea that we're going to use TikTok to try to sell in a traditional sense, I think is going to harm the actual platform itself. And that's just my view.
Lebo?
Oh gosh, am I muted? Okay, no. I absolutely agree with Sylvester. I think that social media is for people, by people. And so the most successful brands on social media are going to be the brands that really leverage off of the powers of collaboration, and meaningful, authentic collaboration. And what we've seen in the past is that when brands work with influencers, they try to control and direct the narrative. And what I would like to suggest as a marketer is that when brands work with influencers, that they really look to them as the lead for the campaign in terms of strategy development, because that influencer understands their market. That influencer understands how people perceive them and consume their content. So they're the best person to suggest how a campaign should be created for their page so that they can get the best out of the people who are following and consuming the content. I don't think that social media is a space where brands are supposed to be the stars. I think social media is a space where brands are supposed to really plug themselves into important conversations and to critical hashtags. They're supposed to just plug themselves in there and be part of something, not be the stars of something. And in that way, they become the stars of something. That's how I see it.
Anybody disagree with Lebo?
I agree.
I think I must say, Lebo's point is really potent and it's very challenging, because obviously no brand wants to go to a platform and then not want to be a star of it, So if you are Nike, you want Nike to still come through and still be strong. But I think it's in the how, that must be done. A balancing act between how you show up is going to be different to the what, to the showing up itself. And I think for me, the concept of being present on social media and engaging with consumers on social media is led by the social listening aspect of your brand. And so where is your brand able to plug itself in based on the conversation that's taking place? It's not come listen to me and listen to what I'm here to say, but it's about amplifying and finding the values that align in the right sort of contents or in the right sort of hashtags and conversations.
Yeah, and I think it goes the other way too. In fact, sometimes just because somebody's got 2 million followers, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right for your brand. So brands need to also kind of check out.
That's right.
That kind of stuff.
Right.
So, Lebogang, any added comments on TikTok?
TikTok, I'll just say it talks about more of social media holistically. It's just investing in partnerships and just instead of just once-off influencer pushes. So I was talking to a friend of mine, he's a photographer, and what he said is some brands use photographers for certain things, but they dilute who they are. So for example, there's Neto. He worked with Coca-Cola on a big campaign, the AMA 2000 campaign. That campaign was not diluted by anyone. It's so authentic and it says it's him. If you go to his Instagram profile, you'll see him. And that's what he brought to the brand. And I believe that's why it was so successful. So yeah, brands shouldn't dilute what influencers stand for and their type of style.
So I've got a question, a very valid question before we move off TikTok here. From Tadeka, which brand or brands in South Africa and globally do you think is using TikTok well? Arthur?
The one I've seen using it particularly well is Starbucks. Aside from having their own channels for the brand overall and also for local outlets, which can work well. It can also be a disaster. They also work very well with the most popular YouTube followers TikTok followings. And an example was when they launched a new Frappuccino last year. They invited all the most popular TikTok stars, which was a stroke of genius, because at that stage, the TikTokers weren't getting a lot of attention. They weren't getting a lot of love. Starbucks showed them the love, and they turned out in their droves. And it was truly a TikTok celeb fest. And it was just one example of a number of brand activations that they did with TikTok, and increased their brand popularity in that demographic quite dramatically.
Sure. So TikTok, we're starting to run out of a little bit of time here. So just to move off TikTok, Sylvester, in your experience with working with brands who have now both TV and social media campaigns running in tandem, is there an increase in return on investment? And does social media play a huge role, an important role in that?
Oh, absolutely. I think by now any marketer with their salt would know the importance of integration of different mediums to amplify a very strong message. And I think that most brands today rarely actually have a campaign that doesn't have a very strong social media support or drive. But I think the big challenge is that social media is always seen as just a support. A support to an above the line campaign. And I think where there's an opportunity is, and I think we've seen it with a couple of brands, particularly on the AB and Bev side, in terms of alcohol and lifestyle, that social media can actually be the lead on the campaign. So I think going forward, we are going to be seeing a lot more, alignment of the campaign lead that's coming out of social media, because we've seen that one of the best campaign at the Prisms last year was driven on social media completely. It didn't really have any above the line or any other mediums supporting it outside of just social media and PR, for an example. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to give social media a very strong sense of leadership versus just it being a support for big campaigns.
And I think you can see that because you see a lot of the creative agencies buying out some of these digital agencies, whereas there has been some instances like VMLR, which with Y&R, shall I say, where the digital agency has been the driving force behind it. And I think you'll see that more in the future. But I also today, people's attention spans are very short. But with the new generation, content needs to look a little bit different. It's got to be short for not only a short content, but for a short period of time that like with Instagram, it's there for 24 hours and then goes, called ephemeral content. But how are brands managing to actually think about this in smaller and more tighter frames? And are they be able to adapt from the television 30-second commercial to a 5-second YouTube or a let's stay for 24 hours? Back to you, Sylvester, before I go to Lebo and Lebogang.
I think the whole concept of application of the work is actually coming across very strongly across many brands, because many brands are able to conceptualize and think about how it lives on, how their work lives on above the line mediums like television, but also they get already, amplified and activated for other mediums like social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And nowadays we are seeing that when the briefs come in, they come in already with those outputs required, as a standard drive for the campaign. So there's never just these are the three mediums and we focus on them only, but we always have to also focus on the secondary mediums and how the material that we are creating is going to live on those mediums. It's actually, to be honest, it's actually standard practice now. We think about how does it live on all the other platforms that the brand is present on or that they've chosen as their marketing mix.
Lebogang, you specifically it's specifically digital and social. Okay, so the traditional sides of it is actually outside of that space. How do you find brands are coping with both the social media and digital space and integrating and making it a kind of completely integrated campaign?
It's a very interesting question. And to be honest, brands struggle with that a lot in terms of finding the focal point between the two. But yeah, I think data would really help you when it comes to certain things like that. So understanding the audience again and those type of things. So going back to what Sylvester was talking about, digital and TV, I always have a rule of thumb where I say with TV, it's a story. So it's a story, and at the end, you will see the brand and all of that. But on digital, you must start with an explosion. So it must be what you end off with on TV, you start with on digital, just to grab their attention, because you only have 3 seconds to land your message and get your message across. The rest could be airy-fairy stuff. But if you have your brand, you have the message, and you have your talent in the first 3 seconds, and maybe push it out to 9 seconds, land your message, you're done.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. You're right, because it is a slightly different approach from that perspective. As a podcaster, Lebo, obviously, again, mostly been on the digital platforms, but so critical to push from the traditional platforms back onto digital. What are your thoughts from brands?
So the podcast landscape is a very interesting landscape, and I'm very excited about it. And what we're seeing is, so I just want to give a brief, overview of the landscape. There are over 800,000 global podcasts out there and over 54 million podcast episodes. And Forbes is predicting that by 2021, the podcast market will be worth $1 billion. $1 billion. And if we take it down to the South African market, what we're seeing from the PwC report, for example, is that they're saying that podcast advertising in South Africa is growing year on year by 50%, which means that globally, brands are seeing a lot of value in podcasts, and they're starting to invest in podcasts, which is very exciting, because that means that, the use of multimedia is growing traction in the brand space, and that they're really trying to create a 360 kind of sensory experience when they create content for their market. And what we're seeing in the podcast space is that there's a lot more branded podcasts that are coming out. And branded podcasts are just when a brand decides to pay for advertising on a specific podcast and leverage from that market. Sometimes what brands will also do is get a brand representative, so somebody who works in that company, to speak on the podcast on behalf of the company, just because they have good knowledge of, the products and the services, and so they can do justice, to the company when they're on the podcast. But another thing that I'm seeing, which I find very interesting, is that a lot of brands, especially in the financial sector, is that they are. Can you see me? I'm not too sure. My screen has gone black. Can you see me? Anybody?
We can see you. We can see you.
Oh, can you see? Okay. What you're seeing is that there are a lot more brands that are investing in in-house podcasting. So they're creating their own podcast stations. F&B is trying to do this, I think. And Microsoft has done it very well. eBay has done that very well. And they want to completely take control of the entire narrative. They want to be their own storytellers. And you're seeing a lot more in-house podcasting going on. But I would personally advise against that, because I believe that as brands, what we should be doing is going to the market, not asking the market to come to us. So we should be going to the spaces where the market already is and plugging ourselves into those spaces, going to the podcasts that already have the followers and listeners that we want, and plugging ourselves into that journey. Because when people listen to podcasters, they believe that that person has a completely unfiltered view and perception of everything. So everything that they're sharing is completely unfiltered, and it's a personal opinion, and people enjoy that honesty and authenticity. So once brands start to do that on their own, what happens is people think that everything that is being produced is just manufactured and it's not real or authentic. So I'd really recommend that brands invest in podcasts that already exist instead of creating their own in-house podcasts.
Cool. Arthur, Catherine is just talking about the numbers. I think you have addressed the numbers about TikTok. Do you want to readdress it, or you've worked out how the numbers from TikTok have increased from, I think she said 1.7, if I'm not mistaken, 1.7 million to the 9 million, or 4 million to the 9 million. Can you just elaborate on how we worked that out quickly? You're on mute. Arthur, you're on mute still? You're on mute?
Oresti, I think she was asking about Instagram numbers there, because we didn't previously have TikTok numbers. But I'm not sure where the 1.9 million comes from, but our numbers have shown significant growth year on year over the last 4 years or so. Last year was over 6 million Instagram users in South Africa. The smaller numbers that are being referenced are often taken from We Are Social. And We Are Social doesn't conduct primary research itself. It aggregates numbers from a variety of sources. And the numbers generally reflect a lack of understanding of the dynamics on the ground in South Africa. So, for example, they'll tell you that there are 36 million internet users in South Africa, that 75% of the population has a computer or laptop, and that 94% of the population has a smartphone. We're talking about population 16 and 16 years old and older. And those numbers clearly show that there's no understanding of the dynamics on the ground in South Africa. My favorite one of their numbers actually is the average internet speed that we all experience. Did you know that all South African adults have an average internet speed of 31 megabits per second, according to We Are Social? And very few of us have that, even as a maximum speed, let alone the average speed that they suggest. So when you look at aggregated numbers as opposed to numbers based on market research on the ground, you tend to find massive disparities. And we don't analyze their numbers, aside from the kind of comment I'm giving you now of how their numbers clearly don't reflect the dynamics on the ground.
Cool, thanks, Arthur. Really, sure. I cannot believe we've got 4 minutes left on this webinar. So just the final myths busting or social media myths. If we can just spend 1 minute on what is your social media myth that you either bust or confirm going forward. What? I don't know who that is. So best, I think yeah. So should we start off with Lebogang? Lebogang, social media myth before we close this podcast off.
Yeah. So my thing is, brands think once you join Black Twitter, once you join a Black Twitter conversation, you've made it. Because I get a lot of questions like that. How can I be part of this conversation and that? And that's not the thing. It's bigger than that. It's about what you're trying to achieve. Are you authentic enough? Is it relevant to your brand? And your approach also matters. So to elaborate more, I'd like to talk about the 3 R's. So whenever you're curating content, always remember the 3 R's, which is recency, reliable, relevant. So users want the latest, most accurate information. That's where it's recent. Reliable, make sure your content is well-rounded by providing your users with reliable material that has long shelf life. And with relevance, the last one, everything you push, regardless of your source, should be relevant to your brand, potential customers, and your industry. That's me.
Very cool, and great insights for brands and people that are actually working with brands there. Lebogang, your final comments?
Okay. My myth is that what I see is that brands don't think that African time. And I think we really need to change our perception of that, because from the numbers that you've shown us in the report, the top 6 on Instagram and even on Facebook, even on Twitter, is African people. And so we need to start creating strategies and campaigns that actually speak to the diversity in the market, instead of just assuming that the market is some type of way because of access to data or access to technology. There are a lot of African people online, and the number is growing day by day. Start changing campaigns and changing how landscape.
So you mean Africa is not a country?
No. African people, Black people. Yes.
No, joking. Okay.
I know.
Sylvester, your final comment on myth busting. Sorry, you're on mute again.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Okay, perfect. I have to say that, for me, it's a big one. It's looking at what has happened in the last couple of weeks in the world, how social media is literally helping us rewrite the world that we want to be part of. It is very obvious then that the way that we look at social media in terms of a campaign strategy and or a part of the marketing mix can be that much more elevated within our strategies for brands. And I think for me, two things really. We must always remember that it's not just about presence. Us being on social media as brands, it's not just to be there, just for the sake of it. It can still be able to drive our business and service our customers. And I saw a tweet over the week where a customer is asking one of the big networks in South Africa about something, and then the person on Twitter responded, "Oh, you must go to the branch." That's a good example of the opportunity that we are missing. That it's not about being present on social media, but we can also be able to address and support our customers on that platform as well. If we can make their lives easier there, that would be brilliant. And another one that's also interesting for me is that social media has also made the world and our brand to be able to get to places that has never been before on the continent. So my plea is that for our brands as well to also think, especially small businesses, to also think that with social media, we're not just in South Africa, but we are Pan-African and we are global. So when we are engaging on those platforms, we have a huge opportunity as well to think that our businesses can also service a much broader and much bigger network, not just in terms of South Africa. And that's a myth that I would like to debunk.
And I think that's very cool, because sometimes we do think a little bit too insularly, and yet we've got the globe as our footprint at the end of the day. Arthur, your closing comments?
I'd like to debunk the myth that we are selling this report for a fortune. And I'm delighted to tell everyone that it will be available at no cost for download, initially from the Ornico site and then from the Worldwide Works website as well. But we'll publicize those links on Twitter in particular, as well as on LinkedIn and Facebook.
In fact, that was my closing statement that I was supposed to make. Arthur, thanks for taking away my thunder. But yes, guys, here are the links. But everybody who did register, we'll get a link to download this this report. I promise you, we could have all gone on for another hour. There's no doubt about it. There's a lot of questions here. I still love to actually ask the panel. We cannot because we've run out of time. But really, guys, to all of you, Sylvester, Lebogang, and Arthur, guys, thank you very, very much. It was a really cool, interesting conversation. And geez, I think we should carry it on at some point in time and see how much more we can give to the audience. So, guys, thanks a lot, and I'm sure we'll chat soon. Hey, picture. Stand against blend. There we go. Do it.
Right.
Thanks. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to the audience for being there. Thanks for joining us. As Arthur has also said, you can download it. It is free. Great myth that's being debunked. And just remember that that social media is there to stay, and let's utilize it as the guys all suggested. Cheers.